Hey everybody, welcome to the Spotlight. I'm so excited that you're here. Tonight, we're gonna have a conversation with my good buddy, Marcus Donalson. He and I worked at a church together down in Carlsbad, California. And it's a predominantly white church, and Marcus is a black man. And we met, it was the second week that he was employed there, and we met backstage in the green room, and I simply leaned over and said, "So Marcus, what's it like being a black man leading worship for all of us white people?" And it was from that moment that our friendship and our relationship began. And so I want to share some of those insights that I had from that conversation a couple years ago and give you some insight as what it is like to be a black man in the middle of a predominantly white church and what in the world we should do with everything that's going on in the world around us. So stay tuned. I think you'll find it helpful and insightful. All right. Hey, everybody. I got Marcus in the house with us. Marcus, thanks so much for joining the Spotlight. We're going to have a fun conversation, an interesting one, I think. So thanks for being here, man.
Of course.
Would you mind telling the people a little bit about you, where you grew up and how you became friends?
Yeah, so I'm coming all the way from California in Oceanside. And Steve and I know each other because we worked at his last job together. He was the young adults pastor down here at Daybreak Church, and I got hired on like 2.5 years ago as 1.5 years ago as the music director. So I'm like transitioning into doing more stuff there, and I've been doing youth services and a bunch of other worship things at the church. But overall, like my job title there is just music director, and I've grown up in California my whole life, living in sunny 75-degree weather for as long as I can be. So
as we speak, dude, man. It's raining right now. So
bro, it's like burning hot out here. So like low key, don't be mad. It's like 1,000 degrees out here right now.
Well, hey man, in the intro to this thing, I told everybody that you and I met backstage in the green room during one of Jason's sermons, and basically turned to you and said, "Hey, what's it like being the only black guy on staff at a predominantly white church?"
Yeah.
And boom, our friendship kind of was birthed from there, man.
The rest is history.
So what I'm hoping to get out of this conversation is, just some help, some insight of what I can do. I work at a predominantly white church in a predominantly white city. We've got some color for sure, but it's largely white. So I guess where I want to begin is simply this. Like, can you remember, maybe not the first time, but some point in your life where you have experienced racism on some level?
Yeah. Probably one of the most recent times where it was kind of blatantly racist was where I was coming home from college. I was commuting back and forth to LA every day for production school. And I had just like bought my first car, which was like this really rad, like 2003 Beamer. And it was a coupe. It was like everything I'd ever dreamed of. And as like a 21-year-old, you're hyped on life. So I'm driving home and it's LA. So it's stop and go traffic, like basically the entire way home, listening to podcasts and doing everything I can to not go crazy. And all of a sudden the cop like flags me down and pulls me over to the side. He asked me like, "You know how fast you were going?" And like out of response, like I've been sitting in traffic for like the last hour and a half, and I kind of like look over at the freeway and nobody's moving. And I was like, "No, officer, I don't know how fast I was going." He's like, "You really need to check your speed. You could have hurt somebody out here today." And I was like, and I looked again because I was like, maybe I'm crazy. Maybe like he sees something I don't.
Yeah.
And still like wall to wall traffic, like no one's moving. And all of a sudden he's like, "How long have you had this car?" And I was like, "Oh, got it. Okay." Because I still had like the brand new tags on the car. Like I just drove it off the lot maybe like a couple of days ago.
Yeah.
And that was he was like very like short and sharp and made me get out of the car. He like maybe open the trunk and make sure I didn't have things in the back of the trunk. And I had to like show him the little thing that you put in the corner of your car to let him know, like, "Hey, I haven't got my tags yet. I haven't got my license plate yet." So, and he was like, "All right, stay here. I'm going to like go write you up." And I was like, "For what? Like, what did I do? I wasn't speeding. We're in wall-to-wall traffic." And he's like, "Don't argue with me. I don't want to like," he's like trying his best to be nice. But yeah, it was just like a very weird experience to know that like I got pulled over basically because I was driving a nice car. And um and like the guy wasn't very uh I guess cordial about it. He did his best to like kind of hide the intention of like, do you know how fast you're going? But I feel like he's like thinking of that as he's walking up to my car. He's like, well, I gotta tell him something. But
Right.
yeah, I think that's like a very minuscule. I've had some like different run-ins with the cops where it's been a little bit more a little bit scarier, but this is a family program, so I don't want to.
My experience is probably the opposite. When I got pulled over, I knew exactly how fast I was going, and it was way over the speed limit, right? I've never had to get out of the car and for them to go search my car or anything like that. So I've heard this. I've got a handful of friends that are black, and they said there's a point in a young man's life when they grow up, a black man's life, where they'll have the conversation about the police, like the father to his son about what to do when you interact with the police. As a white man, I've never had that conversation with my dad. In fact, my dad was a cop. And so my approach to life when the police showed up was like, oh, good, the police are here. Thank God. You know, no worry, no care. It's like, well, they're going to take care of it and it's going to be just and safe. What's been your experience with it?
The complete opposite, man. I think I've never necessarily, until I got older and started to understand what was going on, I didn't really fear the police. I had a friend whose dad was like a supervisor in the OPD. So I was like still aware that there were like some dangers I needed to be, that I needed to be like on guard for. But I think that talk that you're referring to happens when you're about like 16, 17 years old and you start to drive. And my dad sat me down, and it was like, it's not as intense as it was, and it has been the last 5 years. But he basically sat me down and was like, look, you are going to be driving a nice car, and you have to like be careful. And I was like, what do you mean? Like, I'm a great driver. Like, I like didn't really have any issues. I'm like a pretty responsible kid. And he was like, look, you're a black male in America. And so for some reason he was like struggling to really find the words to explain it to me. And he's like, look, it's just harder for us. You need to be more careful. And it's important that if you get pulled over, like, yes, sir, no, sir, give them everything they ask for. Don't ask questions. Just do what they're asking. It's more important for you to get home. If there's something deeper and like more like racially motivated that's happening, like we will take care of that. But the most important thing is that you come home alive. And I don't think I really understood the depth of that conversation until maybe like a couple of years later when I got pulled over, and like the cop wasn't like a really nice guy who I knew because it was at Oceanside, and I got pulled over in like Orange County, and like the guy is much more agitated, and you can tell he's a little bit more on edge. And again, like I'm not the type of person to necessarily read the intentions of somebody because I can't read minds or anything like that. But I've been pulled over before when I wasn't the driver, and some of the cops that I see are much more calm, I guess is the best way to put it. So I think in those moments, you start to recognize what your parents, as a black kid, have been trying to relay to you for years and years, and you do your best to remember all those conversations. And I think there's like a little bit of an innate and inherent like you know what to do just because you've like heard this talked about so many times, and you like immediately like, yes, sir, like you got everything ready to go, and you don't even think about it. It sucks that that's like kind of how I view the police, but it's more important right now to be alive than it is to.
Well, and that's your experience though. That's your experience with the police, and mine is the exact opposite.
Right.
We can sit here and psychoanalyze and try to explain all that stuff, but I think at the end of the day, like that's just true. I think white people and black people, there is a completely different experience when it comes to the authorities, the police,
100%,
and how we're trained or taught or educated on how to respond. And let me ask you this. What's one, maybe two things that you think white people misunderstand about Black culture? Now, I'm
Mm.
not asking you to speak on behalf of, every
Yeah.
African American, nor am I speaking
Yeah.
on behalf of all the white people, but
Hmm.
something, I mean, educate me, man, because I do
Yeah.
not know. I've heard stories, but I don't know the
Hmm.
struggles of being a
Yeah.
Black man in America.
Yeah. I think with Black culture in general, I think that there's an inherent uh, assumption that like we're all very like into loud, like violent things.
Mm-hmm.
That has not always been like, look, I love Kendrick Lamar and J. Cole and all kinds of rap music. Like you can name pretty much every rap artist and I'll know an album or a song or something that I've connected to through them.
Yeah.
But the idea that like because I listen to that music, that is how I like will respond in my own life is probably like the biggest misunderstanding that I've literally seen people in my own life go like, oh, like you don't do drugs or like you don't have like a gun like under your pillow at night. And I'm like, I
Yeah.
live in Oceanside, bro. Like I live on like a hill and both my parents are like very, very like my mom's a nurse, my dad's been working for churches for a
Right.
good portion of his life and now he's in insurance, like I didn't grow up like in the hood, you know what I mean? But
Right.
people, the way that, and I think it's really until they like get to sit down and talk with me that they recognize like, oh, he's a little different than most of the other Black people I've either come into contact or seen on TV. Like
Yeah.
I would say I don't talk like most Black people you see on TV. I'm a little bit more well spoken and I don't necessarily dress like most of the people you'll see on TV. And
So,
it's just a very different,
so
it's
dude. Okay,
yeah,
so you're bringing this up with stereotypes. Okay, true confession time, and you and I are friends, so I can. Um,
yeah.
when I first met you, I kind of painted you out to be a certain person, and you're not that person.
Mm-hmm.
But I was
Mm-hmm.
blown away because on your keychain, and even I think at the time on your cell phone, um, you were repping Star Wars.
Yeah.
And,
Huge
and
nerd.
it did not.
Black Panthers posters right
That's what
behind
I'm
you.
saying, dude. Like your Marvel, your Star Wars, like it did. I'm like, this guy's not. He's not fitting my preconceived notions. You're not fitting my mold. And I just sat there for a second. I had two thoughts. One, I was like, Steve, you ignorant. Like, come on, man. And then two, I was like, there's so much more depth here
Mm-hmm.
than what I had just in first glance, first conversation, in the I guess label or box that I had placed you in.
Sure.
And all of a sudden I went, oh man, this immediately shatters my stereotypes. And
Yeah.
I grew up in a pretty diverse public school system.
Yeah.
The city I was in, I would say is predominantly white, but we had a large Black, a large Hispanic population there, and Asian as well in the surrounding cities. So
Yeah.
it wasn't downtown LA, but it was fairly diverse. And so I thought I had a good understanding. And then I remember like playing that thing through going, oh man, there's so much more room for growth.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So in hearing you talk about this and you're my buddy.
Yeah.
So I figured I could throw
Oh, dude, look, honestly, I think those are like some of my favorite moments is when my friends who have known me for a short period of time or a long period of time would be like, man, when I first met you, I was like, I had this idea of who you were going to be and how you're going to act. And then I was absolutely wrong. I think that's
100%.
probably like one of the biggest compliments I could have gotten in the last, like, as I've gotten older and understood like the stereotypes that are applied to me on a daily basis. I think it's great when I get the opportunity to show people that not all Black people act a certain way. And
Totally.
I think that's probably the biggest that's the biggest frustration that I deal with in life from an individual standpoint. And you mentioned earlier, like, you don't have to speak for the entire Black community. I do though. You know what I mean? Like, no matter what I do, I speak for all Black people. And I think that's like a huge burden to bear as an individual. Because a lot of the environments that I'm in, there aren't a whole lot of Black people. I'm in a church in Carlsbad, where like our demographic is predominantly white. So when I speak, most people in that church are going to go, that's probably how most Black people feel. That's probably how all Black people feel.
So where does it come from? Because never once when I'm on stage going and talking, or it's a sermon, a welcome announcement, whatever it is, never does it cross my mind that, hey, I need to say this well because people are viewing me as like the token loudspeaker for white people. Like that's never entered into my brain.
Yeah. I think from a Black standpoint, I've always been taught that you represent your family. Yeah. And like,
okay.
So when I get up and I do something and I'm speaking or performing or singing or anything, like my last name and my name that was given to me by my parents is basically like in big bright lights. And so that reflects on my mom and dad, and that reflects on my brother, that reflects on their parents, you know what I mean? So I think we as a Black community have always had the culture of like, we are all in this together. And I think for years and years since, I don't mean to get like too deep into this, but like since slavery, there's been like this community mindset, and like we are all like having to deal with this. Like if you do something, you're speaking for all of us. So you have to carry yourself well. You have to speak well and highly of yourself. You have to be the example, because so many people day in and day out don't get to see this side of our culture, this side of our community. So when I do speak the way I do, when I do hold the jobs that I have, and when I do accomplish the things that I do, it's not just for me. It's for my mom and my dad. It's for the Black people that I went to high school with. You know, like we've always been raised in this like family mindset. Yeah. I can't really speak to that from a white person's perspective. I don't know why they would like deem us all the same based off of one opinion, because and I had a good conversation with our executive pastor. Yeah.
I think it's ignorance on one level.
Mm-hmm. In no other like area of our like existence are you like, well, if Steve speaks, this must be how all people who are named Steve and are white and wear glasses think.
Yeah.
But like that is kind of just the way our country has grown. I don't think it's right, but at the same time, I think it's important that I continue that mentality. Even when I have kids, I want my kids to understand that they don't just represent themselves. They are a walking embodiment of not only our family, but of the love of Christ too. So like they have to remember that like the idea in Romans 12 of being this living sacrifice, and understanding that like you're dying to self in a way to ensure that people are seeing the goodness of God through you, is important. So that's not to say that like Black people have it all figured out and that we really understand the gospel that nobody else does. But
right. No, I'm with you.
But yeah, I think that's just something that happened like through my parents and kind of just continued to grow as I got older.
I'm kind of heading up, and I'm the champion of our small group ministry here, just trying to build community for people. And Darcy and I joke all the time. We're just amazed at how, from an outsider looking in on Black culture, it seems that community for you guys is just it's second nature, man. It's just a part of who you are. And I've always been envious because of white people. I think there's this individual mindset, and maybe there's an immediate family connection where our last name has power, but it doesn't really go beyond that. You know what I'm saying? And we just joke all the time. It's like, man, we have so much to learn from Black culture and Black church, because it's just I don't know. You guys just do it really, really well. One quick story, and then I got a church question for you. But I went with my family, went down to a church in LA, Fame, First African American Episcopal Church, I think, if I get that right. And, they do the church service. My family, there's 4 of us. We are the only white people in there, dude. And we're sitting down, we're in the pews, and it's the turn around and greet your neighbor thing. And so they set it up this way in the church. They said, okay, if you're a guest, if you're new, why don't you stand on up so we can greet you? And my parents are just sitting there frozen. And I like immediately, dude, I'm up. And they're all looking at me like, what are you doing? Because in white church, like, we don't do that. You know what I'm saying? No one, we want to be anonymous. We don't want to be called out. And I'm looking at them going, we're the only white people here. They know we're new, man.
Right.
And then there were a couple of other people that were black in the church. That was their first time. Mm-hmm. But I tell you the story because and it was like 5 to 10 minutes of greeting, of saying hi, shaking hands. Mm-hmm. I've never felt more welcome in a church in my life. I had people I didn't even know rush towards us, give our family hugs, embrace us, tell us how excited they were that we were a part of their community. And we were white people trying to lean in and understand and learn, and not to come and give them money or to help build their church with our white systems and structures.
Right.
And we were just there to learn and to watch and be a part of the body. And it was beautiful, dude. We have a lot to learn from Black culture, from Black people. I want to ask you a question. But you're a Black man in a predominantly white church leading worship. Is that complicated? Do you thrive in that environment? Is it challenging? I mean, what's the thought process as you're going through that?
I've been blessed to live in a house with my dad who's led worship and been a part of like a bunch of bigger things outside the church. Leading worship has never been something that's difficult for me because it's a response to God. I'm not doing it for the people standing out in the congregation. I'm doing it to respond to God. I think where probably like the biggest hurdles come is in connecting on a personal level with the people at my church. They're all really rad people. You're at Daybreak. We have like a really rad community there. But there's a lack of understanding of like, I guess there's a lack of like even ground where like I came from one place and they came from a completely different place. So that church you were just talking about is what I grew up in, right? Like predominantly Black. We're spending lots of time not on the message. You know what I mean? Like first like couple of hours of service are like announcements and worship.
That's right.
More worship. And then like, there's like a bunch of other things before you get to the message. And so coming to Daybreak and I've been at like traditional churches for like at least 15 years now. So like when I was younger, that's kind of what I grew up in. But as I got into like my high school and college years, I've been much more accustomed to a church like Daybreak. That's much more like contemporary. And I think I've learned to be able to level with the things that they're going through as a community. And the things that they are looking for as a church body. So as a worship leader, I always feel it is my job to lead them in a direction that allows them to be authentic in their response. And I think when I first got to Daybreak, I didn't know how to do that because I'm much more like outspoken and like energetic. And I watch like our congregation be a little bit less like involved in that process. They're standing there with their coffee and they're like, just give me to the message. I don't know why I'm singing these songs necessarily. And I just know this happens for like 30 minutes before the message. And
like it's the warm-up act or something.
Right. Yeah. So I think, and again, it's funny that you ask all these questions because I think like more and more I'm recognizing that it's less about like race and it's more just about like the environment that you grew up in. I grew up in a house where there was always worship music playing and I was encouraged to like be outwardly demonstrative about my worship. And I think that's just like kind of a difference in the Black community and the white community. You go to a Black church, the music is loud and everybody's singing the songs, even if you don't know them. There's people speaking in tongues. Like there's a lot of things going on. And it's not just like, it's not necessarily one-sided. And at certain contemporary churches that I've been to, there's more of a culture of like, I'm here to receive. which again isn't bad. I'm not saying one is better than the other. I'm just saying the cultures are different.
It's different.
So like, yeah. And even like just music in general from the African American community and any other culture outside of like the white culture, like you're responding to what's happening. If I go to a concert at like, if I go to a rap concert, I'm singing the lyrics. I'm like doing all that kind of stuff, even pop music and jazz and things like that. You're responding to things like that.
Right.
And I think you go to like more traditional, like classical music, you're there to like listen and like receive. So my girlfriend gave me like really good perspective on that a couple of months ago, and I like have sworn by it since then. I think it's a matter of like understanding the culture that you're walking into. And it took me some time to understand the culture that I was walking into, even in Carlsbad. You know, this is a different group of people than I'm used to. I came from the Rock Church down in San Diego, where there's a lot more of a diverse culture down there. There's people who are much more demonstrative. And when you, like, you back away from the mic and they don't need you. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They don't need you to sing
they're good,
song.
man. They're going to keep it going.
Yeah, they're good. They could lead the songs themselves. I'm kind of just there. They're participating with me. And I think kind of creating a culture at Daybreak of participation was probably the biggest hurdle, not because those people didn't know God or they weren't like in tune with the Spirit. They had just been so used to a culture of like, I am more inward focused and not necessarily outwardly demonstrating my worship. And that's been a cool change to watch our church go through. And
that's great.
Yeah, and I know you asked me like as a Black guy, how does that go? It's like kind of the same as any other worship leader, you know. I think there are so many things that seem like, man, racially that would be such a different approach, but yeah, that was just fun. You know, I got to engage with the congregation on a level that wasn't just like shaking hands or getting to have random conversations. When you engage with them spiritually, that's a whole nother level.
Yeah. Well, we're running out of time, so I want to ask you one more question, and then I would love to pray for you and for the Black community, and I would love it if you would pray for me and the white community, and that we would find, man, some way to not just love each other from afar, but to lift up and carry each other's burdens. So I guess kind of the final question here is what is something that I can do? Like I'm up here in Linden, Washington, dude. I'm like a stone's throw away from the border, a small town, and just predominantly white. What can I do? What can we do? What can our church do?
Yeah, I think it's important for churches and people in communities like that. Like I think you told me a while back, Linden was like 93% white. So it's kind of hard for you to be creating a ton of relationships with people who don't look like you. But as much as you can, I encourage you to seek out opportunities, not as necessarily like a research project or anything like that. But seeking out opportunities to understand something that's different from what you're used to. That is so huge in understanding what other people are talking about, because it's hard for someone who this isn't necessarily a Black community thing, but my dad used to use the phrase, you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
So you can't necessarily level with somebody or understand what they're going through if you don't know them and you don't know what they're walking through and dealing with every day. So I think that's like a huge thing, is exposing yourself to different cultures and different music and different preachers. If you're going to church regularly, if you're on staff, exposing yourself to different voices. Don't let it be the same people. Your circle has to expand and be more than just the people who are always going to agree with you. Be challenged by people outside of your circle of comfortability. And I think as like the church, like capital C church, it's important to talk about issues like what we're dealing with in our country right now of systemic racism and police brutality, and ensuring that we're not only covering these things when it's in the news cycle.
Right.
Because I think it's so hard for the authenticity, which is totally there, to come across in the way that you want it to, when it's only happening at certain times.
News cycle.
When You know what I mean? You got to be able to preach to your congregation. It doesn't always have to be like, today we're talking about racism, because I feel like a lot of people are going to get up and be like, oh, this isn't what I came to church for.
Yeah.
But, you know, when you're preaching sermons on the Good Samaritan, or when you're preaching about like the life of Jesus, you know, Jesus hung around people who didn't think like him.
Yeah.
He roasted the Pharisees like regularly on a daily basis. He was seeking out the Pharisees to just be like, guys, what are you doing here? You know, he hung out with tax collectors and prostitutes and lepers and people who were just so far outside of the bubble of comfortability during that time. And I think it's important to be teaching our congregation that if the guy we're supposed to be modeling our lives after did that, we should probably be doing the same. Right. And it's important to be preaching about things like this and making sure we're loving our neighbor as we love ourselves, not just when it's in the news cycle, seeking opportunities to love people and bless people and get outside of your circle of comfortability, man. It's so crucial. Even as a Black person, it's hard for me to step out of my comfort zone. It was when I was taking this job at Daybreak, I was like, man, I don't know anybody here. And this is like a predominantly white church. Like, how am I going to fit in? But that's where God called me. And I think it's important to step into environments where you're not comfortable, because I feel like that's where God does the most growing. Right. You know, when you have to rely on him to communicate for you and speak through you and create avenues for you to bless people. Like, man, there's no better avenue of growth than uncomfortability. Yeah. So I think those two things are major. Getting yourself out of your own like circle of influence and expanding it. Like, don't ignore those people. God put those people in your life for a reason, but expand that circle of influence, and then ensure that like these issues don't, once it's like not cool to like post on Instagram and like the black boxes fade away and the hashtags go away, you still have the same mentality of like, look, as a Christian, yeah, all lives do matter, but right now we're talking about this, you know? So one day it won't just be Black Lives Matter. One day it'll be that like some other group of people is being oppressed, and we need to acknowledge them and say, hey, as the church, we see you and we hear you and we want to come alongside you. Yeah. There is the idea of unity is really what we want to talk about. So
good. One of the things I'm really proud about our church is we just had a staff meeting about that idea of how do we make sure this isn't just a trend, and when the trend dies, then we move on to something else. But so we talked about, what does our preaching calendar look like for the year or for 2 years or 3 years, and where can we intentionally schedule these things in? Because they're too important not to just wait for, you know, something to happen, another tragic event to happen, and then I'm going to talk about it, and then we're just going to cycle this through, repeat it, and so on and so forth. So I don't know. I'm bragging on our church a little bit because
that's great.
Like, be intentional with this thing. Don't just respond, but try and be proactive in it.
Yep.
Well, that's good, man. Hey, we're running out of time, but I love you, man. I want to pray for you. And as best as I can, as a white man up in Washington, to pray for just Black people, Black men, the church. And if you could pray for me as a white dude and our predominantly white, I know we do have diversity in our church. I'm not saying we don't. We're predominantly white. So man, let me pray for you. Lord, I pray for my friend Marcus. I just thank you so much for putting him into my life, Lord. Pray, God, that you would bless him, that you would protect him, Lord, protect his mind. And God, for the family at Daybreak, the congregation there, Lord, I know they already do, Lord, but would they just continue to accept him with open arms, Lord? Would they bring him in? And Lord, I pray that he would always feel the freedom to be fully himself and not have to feel any temptation or pressure to shift and to blend in with white culture. But God, you have made him exactly the way you want him to be, Lord. So would he stand strong in that? Would he be who you have created him to be? And Lord, would the rest of us, as I speak in broad terms, just white culture, would we respect that? Would we honor that? And would we find joy and beauty in all of that? Lord, we lift up Black men all over the world, Black women, Black children, Lord, people of color. And God, we just ask that for your hand of peace and your hand of protection over them, Lord. I pray that the church would respond and that Sunday would not be one of the most segregated days. But Lord, our churches, white culture, black culture, and every culture in between there, Lord, we would be able to gather under the powerful name of Jesus. And we would weep with those who are weeping, Lord. We would mourn with those who are mourning, and we would rejoice with those who are rejoicing.
Yes, Lord.
Would Sunday be a beautiful picture, Lord, of all the things that could divide us? Would it be a beautiful picture of all those different things that do, in fact, unite us in the lordship of Jesus Christ? Lord, I pray for my brother Marcus.
God, I just want to lift up Steve and the heart that you've given him for people. I got to witness it firsthand when he was here in California, and I'm so thankful that he gets to share that gift with the people in Linden. And God, we're thankful for even times like these. The Bible says to count it all joy. This is a trial of our faith right now, God. How much do we trust you to be in our lives and be speaking into the lives of others who may not understand our point of view? But God, even in the midst of all this, you are working, you are moving, and you haven't lost sight of anything. This isn't a surprise to you, God. So we're thankful that you are a God who is always prepared and always loving and always gracious. God, I pray that as the white community continues to become educated on issues that may have been around for years and years, would the guilt not be overshadowing the love that you have for them, and the understanding that we as a Black community are just looking for people to come alongside us. We have a savior in you, God. We need allies in other communities, and would that be the message that is relayed day in and day out? I pray for more and more understanding. I pray for more unity. I pray that your voice would be heard louder than any other, because that voice of love and of grace and of true understanding is what's really going to make changes. We as people can be used as vessels, but you, Lord, are the one that can change the hearts and the minds of people. So with all the laws and the things that we want to change as humans, God, would that become secondary to the heart change and the mindset changes in both communities, God? We want unity. We want one nation under God to really be the creed of this country. And would you make that so in your precious and holy name? We praise you, God. We love you. And would you allow us to continue to seek you as one church, not separate, not spread apart, but God, one church under the precious and holy name of God. And we pray all of this in your son's name. Amen.
Amen. Thanks so much, Marcus. I love you, brother.
Amen.
It's so
love
good.
You, dude.
Man, it's so good to talk.
Yeah, man. Yeah, dude. It's been too long.
Hey, will you do this again with me?
Absolutely, man.
That's what I'm talking about.
Awesome. Let me know.
Yeah. I love it, man. Take care, bro.
All right, man. You too. Love you, dude.
Well, I hope you found that conversation helpful and insightful as well. If you'd like more information on Marcus or Daybreak Church down in Carlsbad, California, I want to encourage you to find them on Instagram and Facebook, and you can go to their website. It's daybreakchurch.org. They're doing some amazing things down there. But for you and I, for us up here in Linden, Washington, let's keep the conversation going. Leave some comments down below. You can email me, find me on Facebook, Instagram. I'd love to carry on the conversation with you as well.